He lost the movement of his legs, and with it the will to keep living, until a little girl enters his dull routine and turns pain into color through simple questions and constant presence. And when he finally stands again, he realizes the heart had been walking long before the body. The ancient Alistair Manor stood majestically atop the hill in Aspenwood, surrounded by gardens once lush, now abandoned. Vines had taken over the stone walls, and marble statues, once imposing, now succumbed under layers of moss and oblivion. It was an autumn day, and the typical fog of the Aspenwood Mountains enveloped the estate like a veil, isolating it even further from the outside world. Within those centuries-old walls, Bernard Alistair, 45, a former acclaimed conductor of the Stirling City Symphony Orchestra, lived in self-imposed silence. Seated in his Italian leather wheelchair, he watched through the library window the coming and going of clouds that covered the historic town. His fingers, which once commanded entire orchestras with millimetric precision, now remained still on his lap. The accident that had left him without the use of his legs had occurred 3 years prior, but the emotional prison he had built for himself was much more recent. "Mr. Alistair, lunch is served," announced Mrs. Eleanor, the housekeeper who had worked at the manor for over 20 years. "You can leave it here," he replied, without diverting his gaze from the landscape. "I'm not hungry. You need to eat, sir. You've barely touched your food for 2 days." Bernard did not respond. He merely continued his daily ritual of empty contemplation. Mrs. Eleanor sighed, placing the tray on the side table and leaving in silence. She no longer knew how to deal with this man who had once been full of life, and now seemed merely a shadow. In the back garden, where the rose bushes still bravely resisted abandonment, Teresa Oliver, newly hired to help clean the manor, watched her daughter Clara playing alone. The 6-year-old girl with curly hair tied in 2 pigtails and bare feet ran among the trees, chasing butterflies and talking to invisible companions. "Clara, don't leave this area, okay?" "Mommy needs to finish her work," Teresa warned, concerned by the vastness of the property. "Okay, Mommy," the little girl replied, as she bent down to examine a purple flower sprouting between the pathstones. Teresa entered through the kitchen door, where Mrs. Eleanor was preparing dinner with a worried expression. "How is he today?" Teresa asked, referring to the master she barely knew. She had been hired only 2 weeks prior, when the previous cleaner had retired. As always. "Doesn't speak, doesn't eat properly, doesn't live. It seems like he's just waiting for time to pass," the housekeeper replied, chopping onions with more force than necessary. "Such a waste. Such a talented man, so full of life. And now this." Teresa nodded in silence, picking up the cleaning products to begin her work in the east wing of the manor. She had heard stories about Bernard Alistair, the conductor who enchanted audiences across the country and around the world. She also knew about the accident, although no one in the house spoke openly about it. It was as if there was a tacit agreement of silence, as if mentioning the past was a way to profane the present. Meanwhile, in the garden, Clara had found a small passage between the giant ferns. Curious as any 6-year-old, she decided to investigate. The natural trail led her to a side door of the manor, a long-forgotten service entrance. The door, to her surprise, was merely ajar. Without thinking twice, the girl entered. The corridor was dark and smelled of mold, but Clara was not afraid. She advanced determinedly, guided by a beam of light coming from the end of the hallway. She reached a spacious room, with walls covered in books from floor to ceiling. In the center, near the window, sat a man in a wheelchair, motionless as a statue. Clara stopped at the entrance, her small box of colored pencils held firmly against her chest. She observed the man for a few seconds, fascinated by the solitary figure. Then, with the naturalness only children possess, she walked up to him. "Hi," she said simply. "Your garden has very pretty butterflies." Bernard slowly turned, surprised by the unexpected intrusion. How long had it been since he heard a child's voice? His eyes, previously empty, now registered confusion. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" he asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "My name is Clara. I came in through the door," she replied, pointing to the corridor from which she had come. "Don't you like children?" The direct question caught him off guard. Bernard didn't know how to react to this small intruder, who stared at him with curious eyes and not a hint of pity. "It's not a matter of liking or not." "You shouldn't be here," he replied, trying to sound firm, but unable to hide his bewilderment. "Why?" Clara asked, approaching closer. "You're alone. People who are alone get sad." Something in the simplicity of that observation struck Bernard like a dissonant note in a perfect symphony. She was the first person in a long time who spoke to him directly, without that tone of pity that irritated him so much. "Do you like to draw?" Clara continued, already opening her pencil box on the nearby table without waiting for permission. "I'm going to draw you." "No, you're not. You need to leave here." Bernard tried to sound authoritative, but there was something about that child that disarmed him. "Just for a little bit," Clara insisted, already scribbling on a blank sheet she had taken from the box. "I'll make you happy in the drawing." "Happy?" The word came out bitterly from his mouth. "And how exactly do you know what my happiness is like?" "Everyone knows what it's like to be happy," she replied without taking her eyes off the paper. "You just have to remember." At that moment, hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Teresa appeared at the library door, breathless and visibly worried. "Clara!" "My goodness!" she exclaimed, rushing to her daughter. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know." She was in the garden and Bernard raised his hand, interrupting the woman's hurried apologies. "It's all right. She didn't do anything wrong," he said to his own surprise. "She was just drawing." Teresa looked at her employer, confused. Mrs. Eleanor had told her he rarely spoke to anyone and never to strangers. "Even so, I apologize." "It won't happen again," she assured, taking her daughter's hand. "Come on, Clara, we have to leave Mr. Alistair in peace." "But I haven't finished the drawing," the girl protested, resisting. "Clara, we can't bother Mr. Alistair. He needs to rest." "I'm not tired," Bernard interjected, his voice firmer now. "In fact, He hesitated, as if the words were difficult to find. "She can finish the drawing if she wants." Teresa and Clara stared at him with equal surprise. For a brief moment, something akin to a smile threatened to appear on Bernard's lips, but it quickly vanished. "Just a few minutes," he added, turning his wheelchair back to the window. "Then you can go." Clara smiled radiantly and bent back over her drawing. Teresa, still confused, remained standing, observing the unusual scene. For the first time since she started working in that house, she felt that something was changing in the stagnant air of Alistair Manor. Outside, the clouds began to disperse, and a timid ray of sunshine illuminated Bernard's face through the window. He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth on his skin. There was something about the child's presence that deeply bothered him, perhaps because she forced him to feel, after so long of being numb. "Done," Clara announced, holding up the drawing for him to see. "It's you playing the piano in a garden full of flowers. Everyone is clapping." Bernard looked at the childlike drawing, a stick figure sitting before a brown rectangle, surrounded by colourful circles that were probably flowers. Around them, several smaller figures clapped. "I don't play the piano," he said, his voice softer now. "I was a conductor. I led an orchestra." "What's an orchestra?" Clara asked, tilting her head. And for the first time in 3 years, Bernard Alistair felt like explaining something to someone. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. 2 days passed since Clara and Bernard's first encounter. The girl had left her drawing on the library table before leaving, and to Mrs. Eleanor's surprise, the paper remained there, untouched, but not discarded. A small change, almost imperceptible to those who didn't know Bernard's meticulous habits, as he used to demand that everything remained in perfect order. Thursday morning dawned with a clear sky in Aspenwood. The scent of hydrangeas that still bravely resisted in the garden permeated the manor through the half-open windows. Bernard, as usual, was in the library, but something seemed different. His eyes were not fixed on the landscape outside, but on the childlike drawing in front of him. "Excuse me, Mr. Alistair," Teresa's voice interrupted his thoughts. "I've come to clean the library." He nodded without saying anything. Teresa began her work in silence, moving discreetly around the room, until Bernard's deep voice surprised her. "Your daughter? Does she always invade other people's property like that?" Teresa stopped what she was doing, the cleaning cloth suspended in the air. "1,000 pardons, sir. I've spoken to her seriously. It won't happen again." "That's not what I asked," Bernard said, turning his chair to face her. "I want to know if she's always so direct." Clara has always been a very spontaneous child, Teresa replied, choosing her words carefully. Since she was very little, she hasn't been afraid of anything. Sometimes that worries me, but where is she now? Bernard interrupted. At school. She studies in the morning at the Central Aspenwood Academy. In the afternoon she stays with me while I work, since I have no one to leave her with, Teresa explained, fearing this might be a problem for her job. But I promise I'll keep her away from you. Bernard remained silent for a few moments, as if pondering something important. Bring her here when she comes back from school, he finally said, his voice softer than Teresa had ever heard. Pardon? Ask Unita, your daughter. Bring her here after school, Bernard repeated. There's a piano in the music room that hasn't been used for years. Perhaps she'd like to see it. Teresa could barely hide her surprise. The man in front of her seemed different from the one described by Mrs. Eleanor and the other staff. Yes, sir. If you're sure. I am, he affirmed, turning his chair back to the window, ending the conversation. When Teresa left the library, Bernard allowed himself a deep sigh. Even he didn't understand what he was doing. Why had he invited that child back? Perhaps it was the absence of pity in her eyes, or the way she treated him like a normal person, not the invalid everyone else saw. In the afternoon, the sound of childish footsteps echoed down the manor's main corridor. Mrs. Eleanor, who was serving tea to Bernard in the library, widened her eyes when she saw Teresa enter, accompanied by little Clara, now dressed in her blue and white school uniform from the community academy, carrying her inseparable box of colored pencils. Good afternoon, Mr. Conductor, Clara greeted cheerfully, as if it were an everyday visit. I brought more paper to draw today. Mrs. Eleanor looked from Clara to Bernard, expecting the burst of irritation that would surely come. To her astonishment, what she saw was a brief nod, almost friendly. I thought you might want to see the piano, Bernard said, indicating the door with a gesture. It's in the next room. Clara's eyes sparkled. A real piano? Can I play it? You can look, play. Well, we'll see, he replied, maneuvering his chair towards the door. Come. Clara followed Bernard down the corridor to the music room, a spacious room with high windows where a black Steinway grand piano occupied a prominent place. The instrument, covered by a thin layer of dust, seemed to patiently await someone to awaken it. Wow, Clara exclaimed, running to the instrument. It's the most beautiful piano I've ever seen. It's a Steinway Model D, one of the best in the world, Bernard explained, approaching. It was manufactured in Germany and brought specially to this house almost 50 years ago. Clara looked marvelously at the yellowish ivory keys. Do you know how to play? The question hung in the air like a dissonant note. Bernard felt a tightening in his chest. Of course he knew. Before dedicating himself exclusively to conducting, he had been a promising pianist. I did, he finally replied. A long time ago. Why did you stop? The brutal sincerity of the question made Bernard avert his gaze. How to explain to a 6-year-old that some things were simply lost? That sometimes life took more than it gave? Things happened, he said vaguely. We can't always do what we want, Clara. My teacher says we can always try again, she replied, gently running her little fingers over the keys without pressing them. She says making mistakes is part of learning. Bernard observed the girl with interest. There was something in the simplicity of that childish philosophy that intrigued him and in a way challenged him. Your teacher seems wise, he commented, moving closer to the piano. Do you want to hear how it sounds? Clara nodded, enthusiastic. Bernard hesitated for an instant, then extended his right hand and pressed a single key. The note major resonated through the room, vibrant despite years of silence. Clara smiled. Play more, she asked. Please. Something in the way she asked, without pity, without condescension, just pure childish enthusiasm, made Bernard extend both hands over the keyboard. His fingers hovered there for a moment, trembling slightly, as if they had forgotten what they were supposed to do. Then slowly, he began to play the first measures of Beethoven's Für Elise. The melody, hesitant at first, gained strength as his fingers relearned the path over the keys. It was not a perfect execution. He was rusty, clumsy, and some notes sounded out of place, but it was music. After so long, it was real music coming from his hands. Clara watched fascinated, her eyes wide, following the movement of Bernard's fingers over the keyboard. When the brief performance ended, she clapped enthusiastically. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she exclaimed. "You're magic, Mr. Alistair." He smiled slightly, the first genuine smile in years. "It's not magic, Clara, it's practice. Lots of practice. Can you teach me?" she asked, climbing onto the piano bench without waiting for permission. Bernard hesitated. The idea of teaching someone something seemed too distant from his current reality. On the other hand, there was something revitalizing in that child's energy, something that pulled him back to a world he had abandoned. Perhaps some basic notes, he finally conceded. "Put your finger here." Meanwhile, at the door of the room, Teresa watched the scene with a mixture of surprise and emotion. She never imagined her daughter could achieve what no doctor, therapist, or friend had managed in the last 3 years: make Bernard Alistair play the piano again. Outside the manor, the gardener, Mr. Anthony, who tended the gardens twice a week, also stopped his work upon hearing the music. He immediately recognized the melody and the instrument. It was the master's piano, silenced since the accident. Leaning on his shovel, the old gardener smiled to himself. Perhaps there was hope for those abandoned gardens after all. If music had returned to the house, perhaps the flowers would return too. The following days brought a new routine to Alistair Manor. Every afternoon after school, Clara came to the music room. Sometimes Bernard taught her simple notes on the piano. On other occasions, he allowed her to draw while he played small excerpts of classical pieces. The house staff observed the transformation with astonishment and relief. It was as if a frost that had lasted for years was finally beginning to melt. A week after their first meeting in the library, Clarence arrived at the manor holding a carefully folded sheet of paper. "What's that?" Bernard asked when she handed him the paper. "It's a to-do list," Clara replied seriously. "My teacher said that when you want to get better at something, you need goals." Bernard unfolded the paper. Written in the irregular handwriting of a 6-year-old was a list titled "Things for Mr. Alistair to Do." 1. Play piano every day, at least 3 songs. Go to the garden to see the flowers. Tell a nice story. Smell the jasmine near the wall. 5. Smile more. He looked at Clara, who eagerly awaited his reaction. "Is this a rehabilitation program?" he asked with a slight tone of irony that the girl didn't grasp. "It's for you to be happy again," she replied simply. "Can we start today?" Bernard looked at the list again. They were simple tasks, almost childish in their simplicity. Yet there was something about them that disarmed him. When was the last time he had smelled the perfume of a jasmine? When had he stopped going to the garden he loved so much? "Are you always so determined?" he asked, folding the paper and putting it in his shirt pocket. "Mommy says I'm stubborn," Clara replied, shrugging. "But I think I just want things to happen quickly." Bernard laughed. A short laugh, almost a sigh, but a laugh nonetheless. "All right, Miss Clara, where do you want to start?" "Fancy in the garden," she exclaimed, already running to open the door. "Mr. Anthony said there's a very old rose bush near the fountain that still produces huge red flowers." Bernard hesitated. The garden. He hadn't set foot there since he returned from the hospital. The idea of being seen out there exposed, vulnerable in his wheelchair, caused him an almost physical anxiety. On the other hand, the expectation in Clara's eyes was almost palpable. "Perhaps another day," he deflected. "We can start with the piano." The disappointment on the girl's face was immediate, but she recovered quickly. "Okay, but you promise that tomorrow we'll go to the garden." Bernard took a deep breath. "I promise to think about it," he replied diplomatically. "Now how about we start with that piece we were practicing yesterday?" 3 weeks passed since Clara entered Bernard's life. Alistair Manor, once enveloped in oppressive silence, was now occasionally filled with piano notes, childish laughter, and conversations echoing through the corridors. The house staff, who once tiptoed to avoid bothering the reclusive master, now found themselves surprised to see him more communicative, asking about the weather or inquiring about the town. It was a Saturday morning when Teresa brought Clara to the manor, exceptionally earlier than usual. Without school, the girl would spend the entire day there. "Good morning, Mr. Alistair," Clara greeted as she entered the library, where he was leafing through an old photo album. "What are you looking at?" Bernard quickly closed the album, as if caught doing something forbidden. "Just some memories," he replied, placing the book on a side table. I didn't know you'd be coming so early today. It's Saturday, she announced, as if that explained everything. Mommy said I can stay all day if you don't mind. I brought my new notebook. It's blue. She proudly displayed the school notebook, its cover decorated with stars and planets. And what do you intend to do with that notebook? Bernard asked, adjusting himself in his chair. I'm going to write our story, Clara declared, sitting in the leather armchair near the window. I'm going to tell how you were sad and how you're getting happy again now. The girl's disarming sincerity still caught him off guard. It was as if she could see through all the layers of protection he had built over the years. And who said I'm getting happy again? He challenged, raising an eyebrow. Mr. Anthony said, she replied promptly. He said you smiled at him yesterday when he brought those flowers for the living room, and Mrs. Eleanor said you asked her to make that pumpkin dessert you used to like. Bernard shook his head, half exasperated, half amused. It seemed the entire staff commented on his small changes, as if observing a rare animal in the process of domestication. Mr. Anthony and Mrs. Eleanor should worry less about my smiles and more about their duties, he grumbled without real irritation. Clara ignored his grumpiness. You still haven't done number 2 on the list, she reminded him, opening her notebook. It's been 3 weeks since I promised, and you haven't been to the garden once. It was true. Despite Clara's daily attempts, Bernard always found an excuse to postpone visiting the garden. The weather was unstable, he would say, or he was too tired that day, or he simply changed the subject, suggesting a new piece on the piano or asking her to tell him about her day at school. The garden isn't going anywhere, Clara. It will be there when I want to see it, he replied, maneuvering his chair to pick up a book from the shelf. But flowers don't wait, Mr. Alistair. Mr. Anthony said the dahlias are blooming now and they'll wither soon. You'll miss them. There was something in Clara's childlike logic that always left him without arguments. Bernard sighed, closing the book he had barely opened. You're persistent, aren't you? He commented in a resigned tone. What's persistent? Someone who doesn't give up easily, who keeps trying even when it's difficult. Clara smiled, revealing the gap where she had recently lost a baby tooth. Mummy says I'm stubborn, but I think I prefer to be persistent. She carefully pronounced the new word. Bernard couldn't help but smile. All right, persistent Clara, let's go to the garden. The girl's eyes sparkled with excitement. Now? Really? Right. Now, he confirmed, feeling a mixture of anxiety and determination growing in his chest. Before I change my mind. Clara ran to call Teresa, while Bernard adjusted his position in his chair, mentally preparing for what he was about to do. It wasn't just a stroll through the garden, it was a confrontation with memories he had buried. Deep, a reunion with a past that hurt like an open wound. Minutes later, Claude, the driver who now also acted as Bernard's personal assistant, pushed his chair down the corridor leading to the back of the manor. Clara skipped ahead, like a small, enthusiastic guide. Are you sure about this, Mr. Alistair? Claude asked in a low voice. You haven't left the house in almost 3 years. I am, Bernard replied, although his hands gripped the arms of the chair hard enough to make his knuckles white. It's just a garden, Claude. What could happen? When the double wooden and glass doors opened to the back terrace, the October sunlight hit Bernard like a physical impact. He blinked several times, unaccustomed to the natural light without the filter of curtains. The air outside had a different scent, damp earth, flowers, freshly cut grass, smells that had been part of his daily life and now seemed almost exotic. Come on, Mr. Alistair, Clara called, already descending the 3 steps that led from the terrace to the garden proper. There's a ramp over there. Bernard indicated the way to Claude, who maneuvered the chair to the side ramp, specially built when he had returned from the hospital. A ramp that had never been used until that moment. When they finally reached the garden level, Bernard felt an unexpected emotion overwhelm him. There was the space he had loved so much, now partially recovered thanks to Mr. Anthony's care. The pruned rose bushes lined the main path. The hydrangea beds exploded in shades of blue and lilac. The old stone fountain, though without water, remained imposing in the center of the space. There, Mr. Alistair. Clara pointed to an arbor covered with flowering vines. They're jasmines. Let's smell them. Claude pushed the chair along the stone path until they reached the semicircular structure covered with white flowers. The perfume was intense, sweet, almost intoxicating. "See?" Clara said, picking one of the small flowers and handing it to Bernard. "Isn't it the most fragrant thing in the world?" Bernard brought the flower to his nose, closing his eyes as he inhaled the familiar aroma. A memory surfaced, unexpectedly vivid. His mother, in the same garden 30 years earlier, teaching him the names of the flowers. "Poet's jasmine," she would say, "because its perfume inspires stories." "It is, Clara," he replied, his voice slightly hoarse. "It is the most fragrant thing in the world." They spent the entire morning in the garden. Clara ran from one flower bed to another, asking questions while Bernard little by little began to relax. He told her about the different plant species, about how the garden had been designed by a French landscape architect at the beginning of the last century, about the parties his parents held there during his childhood. He spoke more in those hours than in all the previous 3 years combined. Mr. Anthony appeared around noon carrying gardening tools. The old gardener stopped, surprised to see Bernard there. "Mr. Alistair, what a joy to see you out here," he exclaimed, approaching with a smile that revealed teeth stained by decades of black coffee. "Hello, Anthony," Bernard greeted, feeling strangely at ease. "Clara insisted I come see your work. I must say I'm impressed with what you've managed to maintain, considering the circumstances." "I do what I can, master," the gardener replied, taking off his straw hat as a sign of respect. "But the garden missed you. Plants are like people, you know. They need attention, conversation. You always had a good hand with them." Clara, who was observing the interaction with interest, approached. "Mr. Alistair can help take care of the garden again, can't he?" she asked, looking from one to the other. "I can help too." The two men exchanged a look. There was a silent understanding between them, an awareness of Bernard's physical limitations, but also a new perception of the possibilities that were opening up. "Of course you can, little one, Mr. Anthony replied, winking at her. The master always had a way with flowers. "Remember those rare orchids, Mr. Alistair? The ones you brought from the Amazon?" Bernard nodded, remembering the orchid collection he had cultivated with such care. After the accident, he had ordered them all to be donated to the Aspenwood Botanical Gardens. "Do they still exist?" he asked hesitantly. "Some of them," the gardener replied. "I kept some seedlings in the greenhouse. I thought you might want to see them again someday." Something tightened in Bernard's chest, the silent loyalty of that simple man, who had preserved a part of his past even when he himself had given up on it. "Thank you, Anthony," he said simply. The gardener merely nodded, putting his hat back on and moving away to continue his work, leaving Bernard with his thoughts and Clara with her infinite curiosity. In the afternoon, Mrs. Eleanor surprised everyone by serving lunch on the terrace, something that hadn't happened since before the accident. Teresa, Clara, Bernard, and even Mr. Anthony sat at the table set outdoors. It was an almost familiar scene, as if for a few hours the pain and isolation had given way to something lighter, more alive. "You know what this garden needs?" Clara asked suddenly, her mouth still full of rice. "A name." "Clara, don't talk with your mouth full," Teresa gently reprimanded. "Sorry, Mommy," the girl swallowed quickly. "But it really needs a name. All important places have names." Bernard observed the girl's enthusiasm with a contemplative expression. "And what name do you suggest?" he asked, genuinely curious. Clara thought for a moment, frowning in concentration. "Garden of Those Who." "Don't run," she finally declared, with the absolute certainty that only a 6-year-old can possess. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Teresa choked on her water, looking mortified at her daughter. "Clara, that's not appropriate. Apologize to Mr. Alistair right now." Bernard, however, raised his hand, interrupting what would be an inevitable scolding. "Why?" he asked Clara, ignoring Teresa's consternation. "Why that name?" Clara shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "Because you can't run, and plants don't run either. They stay in the same place, growing slowly, but they're beautiful anyway, like you." The adults at the table remained silent, processing the child's peculiar but irrefutable logic. Then, to everyone's surprise, Bernard began to laugh. A genuine laugh, which started low and grew until it became almost uncontrollable. It was as if something very old and very hard was finally breaking inside him. "Garden of those who don't run," he repeated, when he finally managed to compose himself. "It's perfect, Clara. Absolutely perfect." That night, when Teresa and Clara had already left and the manor had returned to its usual silence, Bernard asked Claude to take him back to the garden. Under the silvery moonlight, he observed the space that, hours earlier, he had rediscovered through the eyes of a child. "Garden of those who don't run," he murmured to himself, feeling the name resonate with a truth that went far beyond words. And for the first time since the accident, Bernard Alistair allowed himself to cry, not tears of self-pity but of recognition. Recognition that, even broken, even incomplete, there was still beauty to be found. There was still life to be lived. Meanwhile, in the small rented house where she lived with her mother, Clara finished writing in her blue notebook. In large, irregular letters, she wrote, "Today Mr. Alistair went to the garden and wasn't sad. Tomorrow we will plant flowers together." Winter arrived in Aspenwood, bringing with it the characteristic fog of the Aspenwood Mountains and the mild temperatures that attracted tourists from the capital. 3 months had passed since Clara's first visit to the manor, and Alistair Manor was no longer the gloomy, silent place it once was. The garden of those who don't run was coming to new life. Flower beds were replanted, the central fountain was working again, and even the old orchid greenhouse began to be restored under Bernard's careful supervision. Twice a week he and Clara planted seeds or seedlings, following a project they had designed themselves, or rather, that Clara had drawn with coloured pencils and Bernard had adapted with his botanical knowledge. News that the reclusive conductor was re-emerging spread quickly through the town's social circles. Old friends and colleagues from the symphony orchestra called or sent letters, trying to re-establish contact. Bernard, still cautious with the outside world, responded politely but kept his distance. His social life was limited to the small circle within the manor, and for now that was enough. On that exceptionally cold July morning, Bernard awaited Clara's arrival in the library. School had entered winter recess, and the girl would spend more time at the manor during the next 2 weeks. On the table, a gift awaited her, a small red-covered diary with a lock and key. When the door opened, however, it wasn't Clara who entered, but Teresa, alone and with a worried expression. "Good morning, Mr. Alistair," she greeted, visibly nervous. "I came to let you know that Clara won't be able to come today. She's had a fever since last night." The news hit Bernard like a physical blow. In recent months he had grown so accustomed to the girl's daily presence that her absence created an almost palpable vacuum. "Is it serious?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "The doctor at the community clinic said it's just a flu. She needs to rest for a few days," Teresa explained, wringing her hands in her apron. "I apologize for the inconvenience. I know you had plans with her for today." "There's nothing to apologize for. Her health comes first," Bernard replied, picking up the red diary from the table. "Please give this to her." "It's a gift I was going to give her today." Teresa took the package, surprised by the gesture. "You're very kind. Clara will love it. Is there anything else she needs?" "Medicine? Food?" The question caught Teresa off guard. In all her years working at the manor, she never imagined seeing her employer concerned about her family's well-being. "We're fine, thank you." "The clinic provided the medication." Bernard nodded but seemed dissatisfied with the answer. "Claude will take you home today. If you need anything, let him know, and tell Clara that the garden will be waiting for her when she gets better." Teresa left the library with a strange sense of comfort. In just a few months, Clara had achieved what seemed impossible, awakening the humanity that had been dormant in Bernard Alistair. That afternoon, as a fine rain fell over Aspenwood, Bernard found himself alone in his library for the first time in a long time. The silence, which was once his only companion, now seemed strange, almost oppressive. He was distractedly leafing through a book when Claude returned, carrying a folded envelope. "Little Clara sent this for you, sir," the driver said, handing him the paper. "She insisted I bring it today." Bernard opened the envelope with curiosity. Inside, a colourful drawing showed what appeared to be himself in his wheelchair, surrounded by giant smiling flowers. Next to the drawing, in large uneven letters, was written, "Recipe for days without Clara." 1. Play piano. 2. Read a happy book. 3. Talk to the plants in the garden. 4. Write in the blue notebook. 5. Don't be sad. I'll be back soon. An involuntary smile formed on his lips. Those simple childish instructions carried a wisdom that many adults would never achieve. Clara understood, even in her innocence, how dependent he had become on her presence and tried, in her own way, to protect him from loneliness. "Claude," Bernard called, still looking at the drawing. "Prepare the car, please. I want to pay a visit." The driver could barely hide his surprise. "A visit, sir. Where to?" "To Teresa and Clara's house. I want to see how the girl is doing." Half an hour later, to the astonishment of all the manor staff, Bernard Alistair left the property for the first time in 3 years. The journey to the simple neighborhood where Teresa lived with her daughter was made in silence. Bernard watched through the car window the streets of the town he hadn't seen in so long, feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and determination. When they arrived at the small 2-story house, with an external staircase, Bernard faced the first real obstacle. There was no way to go up with the wheelchair. Claude looked embarrassed at his employer. "I can try to carry you, Mr. Alistair." "No," he interrupted, determined. "Ring the doorbell. Ask Teresa to come down with Clara if she can. I'll wait here." Minutes later, a visibly surprised Teresa came down the stairs helping a weakened Clara, wrapped in a unicorn-patterned blanket. The girl's eyes, though feverish, sparkled upon seeing Bernard waiting on the sidewalk. "Mr. Alistair!" she exclaimed, her voice hoarse. "You left the manor." "I received your recipe," he replied, showing her the paper. "But I thought an important item was missing, visiting a sick friend." Clara smiled despite her apparent fatigue. Teresa helped her sit on a small concrete bench near the car, allowing her to be face-to-face with Bernard. "I brought something for you," he said, handing her a package he had taken from a bag beside his chair. Clara opened the wrapping carefully. It was a beautifully illustrated children's storybook, titled Stories for Secret Gardens. "I thought we could read it together when you get better," Bernard explained. "But in the meantime, your mother can read it to you." "It's beautiful," Clara exclaimed, running her fingers over the colorful illustrations on the cover. "Thank you, Mr. Alistair. I received your gift too," he said, referring to the red diary. "I loved it. I'll write in it every day as you taught me." Teresa watched the scene with tears in her eyes. Bernard's transformation in recent months was almost miraculous. From a bitter and reclusive man, he had become someone capable of leaving his comfort zone to visit a sick child. "Clara needs to rest now, Mr. Alistair," she said gently after a few minutes of conversation. "The fever gets worse in the late afternoon." Bernard nodded, understanding. "Of course. I just wanted to make sure she was being well cared for." "I am," Clara assured between coughs. "Mommy makes chicken soup and gives me medicine all the time. And now I have a new book too." Bernard smiled, taking Clara's small hand in his. "Take care. Persistent Clara. The garden of those who don't run is waiting for you." On the way back to the manor, Bernard surprised Claude with an unusual request. "Can we go through the town centre? There's a place I want to visit." The driver, quickly adapting to the new version of his employer, obeyed without questioning. They parked in front of a small musical instrument store on the main street. The owner, an elderly gentleman who knew Bernard from his orchestra days, almost fell backward when he saw him enter his shop, pushed by Claude. "Conductor Alistair. What a surprise!" he exclaimed, approaching to greet him. "Hello, Mr. Davies," Bernard replied cordially. "I need your help to find something special." Half an hour later, they left the store with a small Celtic harp, an instrument that, according to Bernard, would be perfect for Clara's small hands when she started to take an interest in something beyond the piano. That first outing of Bernard's opened the doors to many others. In the following weeks, while Clara recovered, he began to make regular visits to the town. At first, only specific places and for short periods. Gradually, however, he gained confidence to stay longer in public spaces. News of his return to society spread quickly. Old acquaintances approached him on the streets. Local newspapers requested interviews, which he politely declined. And even representatives from the Stirling City Symphony Orchestra made contact, inviting him to commemorative events. Clara, still convalescing, maintained contact through drawings and recipes that she sent daily via Teresa. Each colorful paper brought a new list of tasks, increasingly ambitious. 1, play piano for someone who isn't me. 2, go to the ice cream shop in the square. 3, visit the Imperial Museum. 4, invite someone to dinner. To his own surprise, Bernard fulfilled each of them, as if they were medical prescriptions, and in a way they were exactly that, treatments for a soul that slowly was learning to live again. When Clara finally returned to the manor 2 weeks later, she found a different Bernard, not only more communicative and present, but physically transformed. His grey hair, once disheveled, was cut and well-combed. The unshaven beard had given way to a clean face with more youthful features. Even his clothes, once dark and formal, now featured lighter colors. "Mr. Alistair," she exclaimed upon entering the library. "You look like a prince now." He laughed, genuinely amused by the comment. "A prince in a wheelchair? I don't think that exists in fairy tales, Clara." "Of course it does," she retorted promptly. "They just haven't written about it yet. We can write it." And so began a new phase in their relationship. In addition to activities in the garden and piano lessons, they now spent hours inventing stories and writing them in Clara's blue notebook. Tales about princes in wheelchairs, princesses who saved kingdoms with magical drawings, and enchanted gardens where plants spoke and gave wise advice. During one of these storytelling afternoons, Clara casually mentioned something that deeply impressed Bernard. "You know, Mr. Alistair, my teacher said I've improved a lot in school since I started coming here. She said I'm more focused, and that my essays are the best in the class now." Bernard observed the girl with a new perspective. He had been so focused on how Clara had helped him that he hadn't considered how he might also be positively influencing her life. "That's wonderful. Clara, I'm very proud of you. It's because you teach me difficult words," she explained, drawing distractedly in her notebook. "And also because now I have many stories to tell. No one else in my class knows a real conductor or knows the names of all those flowers in the garden." That evening, after Clara and Teresa had left, Bernard remained in the library, reflecting on the conversation. He realized that, in his obsession with what he had lost, he had never truly considered what he could still offer. Knowledge, experience, stories, resources that remained intact, regardless of his physical limitations. In his personal diary, the one he had started using after Clara's suggestion, he wrote, "Today I realize that I can still teach. I can still contribute. Perhaps it's time to stop thinking only about what I cannot do and start considering what I can still offer the world." Spring had arrived in Aspenwood with all its force. The garden of those who don't run was in full splendor, with flowers of all colors and perfumes mingling in a symphony for the senses. 8 months had passed since Clara's first visit to the manor, and the girl's 7th birthday was approaching. On a particularly sunny afternoon, Bernard was in the music room with Clara, teaching her a simple Bach piece on the piano, when Teresa rushed in. With a worried expression, "Excuse me for interrupting, Mr. Alistair, but I need to speak to Miss Helen urgently," she said, referring to Bernard's sister, who managed the family finances and rarely appeared at the manor. A notice of eviction for our apartment arrived. "The building has been sold and all tenants need to leave in 30 days. Clara stopped playing immediately, turning to her mother with wide eyes. "Are we going to have to move, Mummy?" Teresa tried to smile to reassure her daughter. "We'll figure it out, darling." "We always do." Bernard, who was observing the scene attentively, intervened. "Helen isn't in town, Teresa. She went to Stirling City to sort out some matters and won't be back until next week. Is there anything I can do to help?" Teresa hesitated. She didn't want to mix her personal problems with work, especially now that Bernard finally seemed to be recovering. "No, Mr. Alistair, thank you. I just needed to let you know that I might have to miss a few days to look for a new place. It's impossible to find affordable rent near the centre." Bernard reflected for a moment, drumming his fingers on the arm of his chair. A decision was forming in his mind, something he had been considering for weeks. "Actually, Teresa, I have a proposal for you," he said, adjusting himself in his chair. "The guest house at the back of the property has been empty for years. It's only 2 bedrooms, but it has everything necessary. If you and Clara would like, you can move there." The offer caught Teresa completely off guard. The guest house was a charming building that had once housed illustrious musicians and artists during the manor's golden age. It was isolated enough to provide privacy, but close enough to be convenient. Mr. Alistair, I don't know what to say. It's too generous. It's not generosity, it's practicality, he corrected with a slight smile. Clara already spends most of her time here anyway, and you would save commuting time. The salary would remain the same, of course, just with the benefit of housing. Clara, who had listened attentively, could barely contain her excitement. "We're going to live near the garden, Mummy," she exclaimed, jumping off the piano bench. "Please say yes." Teresa looked at her daughter, then at Bernard. The offer solved her immediate problems and seemed sincere. After so many months working closely with him, she had learned to recognize when her employer was being genuine. "I'd need to see the place first, and think about it calmly," she replied cautiously. "Of course," Bernard agreed. "Ask Claude to show you the house today. If you decide to accept, I can request a thorough cleaning so it's ready when you need to move in." That same day, after checking the guest house and finding it far superior to the small apartment she rented, Teresa accepted the offer. The following weeks were filled with preparations for the move. Bernard, to everyone's surprise, personally got involved in the process, requesting that the house be repainted, that the electrical system be revised, and even that a small herb garden be prepared next to the building. As he had learned from Clara that Teresa loved to grow culinary herbs, the proximity of their new home further transformed the dynamic between them. Clara now came to the manor not only after school, but also in the early morning hours, having breakfast with Bernard while they talked about their dreams from the night before or their plans for the day. On weekends, the three often shared meals on the terrace, discussing books, music, and town news. It was during one of these breakfasts that Bernard felt something strange. He was listening to Clara enthusiastically describe a school project about marine animals, when a tingling sensation ran through his right leg. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but definitely real. He disguised his surprise, not wanting to create false hopes, but that afternoon when he was alone, he repeatedly tried to move his foot. After several frustrating efforts, he managed a slight, almost imperceptible spasm of his right toes. The doctor who had been treating him since the accident, Dr. Evans, was discreetly called the next day. After a series of tests, he looked at Bernard with a cautiously optimistic expression. "There's a slight recovery of nerve response in the right leg," he explained. "It doesn't mean you'll walk again, but it indicates that the injury might not be as permanent as we initially thought." "What does that mean in practice, Doctor?" Bernard asked, trying to control the contradictory emotions the diagnosis aroused. "It means we should intensify physical therapy. With consistent work, you might regain some movement, perhaps even partially bear weight on that leg. However, I don't want to create false hopes. The process is slow, painful, and the results are unpredictable." Bernard remained silent, processing the information. A year ago, he would have dismissed any hope as useless. Now, however, something had changed within him. He had reasons to fight, to try. "When do we start?" Dr. Evans smiled, pleased with the response. "Immediately. I'll refer you to the best physical therapist I know." News of the possible partial recovery was kept secret. Bernard didn't want to create expectations, especially in Clara. Physical therapy sessions were scheduled for times when the girl was at school, and only Claude and Mrs. Eleanor were informed, out of practical necessity. For 3 weeks, Bernard dedicated himself with almost obsessive determination to the exercises prescribed by the physical therapist. With each small progress, a stronger spasm, a slightly more controlled movement, he felt a mixture of hope and fear. It was like relearning to play an instrument after years of abandonment, with the constant uncertainty of never regaining the original skill. On an October morning, while practicing with the parallel bars in the adapted physical therapy room, he managed for the first time to transfer part of his weight to his right leg. It was for only a few seconds, and the effort left him exhausted, but it represented a significant advance. "Congratulations, Mr. Alistair," exclaimed Paul, the physical therapist, an energetic and patient young man who had earned his trust. "This is very promising." Bernard did not respond. He was too focused on the sensation he had just experienced, the floor under his foot, supporting part of his weight, something he hadn't felt in almost 4 years. In the following weeks, the routine intensified. In addition to sessions with Paul, Bernard practiced alone whenever possible. The pain was constant, sometimes almost unbearable, but he persevered. Each small progress was internally celebrated as a great victory. Hiding the advancements from Clara became increasingly difficult. The girl, perceptive as ever, noticed small changes in his posture, in the way he moved in his chair, and even in his mood on particularly exhausting days. "You're different," she commented one afternoon as they drew on the terrace. "You're sitting straighter." Bernard feigned surprise. "Am I? Must be because Mrs. Eleanor is feeding me too much. I'm gaining weight." Clara narrowed her eyes, not completely convinced, but let the matter drop. She had other plans in mind. "Mr. Alistair, you're coming to my birthday party, aren't you? It's next Saturday in our backyard. Mommy said I can invite my school friends and also you, Mrs. Eleanor, Mr. Anthony and Claude. Clara's birthday." Bernard had prepared for this. Weeks earlier, he had asked Claude to find the best chocolate cake in town and order it for the big day. He had also set aside a special gift, a professional watercolor set that he had ordered directly from Silverton. "I wouldn't miss it for anything, Clara," he assured, smiling at the girl. "I even have a new tie for the occasion." On the day of the birthday, the small guest house was decorated with colorful balloons and ribbons. Clara's school friends ran around the backyard, playing among the trees and admiring the garden of those who don't run from a distance. Teresa, with Mrs. Eleanor's help, arranged the food on the table set under a large mango tree. Bernard watched everything from the main house's veranda, feeling a strange nostalgia. When was the last time he had seen so many children gathered? When was the last time he had participated in such a simple and genuine celebration? He decided it was time to join the party. With Claude's help, he descended the ramp leading to the garden. His progress in physical therapy was significant, but still not enough to forego the wheelchair for longer distances. Seeing him approach, Clara ran towards him. "Mr. Alistair, you really came," she exclaimed, hugging him impulsively. "I promised, didn't I?" He replied, feeling a lump of emotion in his throat. "And I brought something for the birthday girl." The carefully wrapped package was received with enthusiasm. Clara tore the golden paper with the impatience typical of her age, revealing the watercolor set in a wooden box with her name engraved on it. "It's beautiful," she exclaimed, opening the box to admire the vibrant colors. "Now I can paint our garden for real, not just draw it." The party proceeded animatedly. Bernard was surprised to realize how much he was enjoying the company of the children, answering their curious questions about the manor, the piano, and even his wheelchair. There was no pity or embarrassment in those interactions, just genuine curiosity and unconditional acceptance. At the moment of singing Happy Birthday, Clara insisted that Bernard stand by her side, along with Teresa. The chocolate cake, decorated with colorful sugar flowers that replicated those in the garden, was met with applause from the children. When everyone had eaten and families began to pick up their children, Clara approached Bernard with a small, poorly wrapped package in her hands. "I have a present for you too," she said shyly. Bernard took the package, genuinely surprised. "But it's not my birthday, Clara." "I know, but you gave me so many things that I wanted to give something back." Moved, he opened the package. Inside was a small metal watering can, painted red in the shape of a heart. "For you to water our garden," Clara explained. "I painted it with Mr. Anthony. He helped make the heart shape." Bernard was speechless for a moment, touched by the simplicity and depth of the gesture. The small watering can symbolized everything Clara had brought back into his life: care, attention, growth. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received," he finally said, his voice choked. "I'll use it every day." Clara smiled, satisfied, and ran to help her mother with the last guests. Bernard remained where he was, the small red watering can on his lap, observing the movement around him. He felt once again the tingling in his right leg, now an almost familiar sensation. But this time there was something different. An impulse, an almost irresistible desire. Looking around to make sure no one was paying attention, he firmly placed his hands on the arms of the chair and with a tremendous effort pushed himself up. For a brief moment he managed to stand, leaning mainly on his left leg but with his right supporting part of the weight. It was only a few seconds before he had to sit back down, exhausted and trembling but ecstatic. He had stood up, alone, without the parallel bars, without help. A small miracle born of months of effort, pain, and above all a renewed will to live. No one had noticed, or almost no one. Across the garden, Mr. Anthony watched him with a knowing smile. The old gardener merely nodded discreetly, as if confirming something he had known for a long time, that some plants, even the most damaged, always find a way back to life when given the right care. That night, when everyone had left and the manor was silent, Bernard wrote in his diary, "Today I stood for a few seconds. No one saw except perhaps Anthony. But it doesn't matter if someone saw or not. The important thing is that I felt. I felt the ground under my feet. I felt my body rising against gravity, against the prognosis, against everything that said it was impossible. Clara gave me a heart-shaped watering can. I didn't fully understand it at the time, but now I realize she's not just watering flowers. She's watering people." The first anniversary of Clara's arrival in Bernard's life was celebrated without fanfare, but with a deep awareness of the transformation that had occurred. In the manor's library, where it all began, a small wooden plaque carved by Mr. Anthony now adorned the door. "Here begins the garden of those who don't run." It was a constant reminder that gardens were not just physical spaces, but also emotional territories that expanded beyond fences and walls. Bernard's physical progress continued, slow but steady. After 6 months of intensive physical therapy, he could take a few steps supported by special crutches. Dr. Evans classified his recovery as remarkable. Though partial, he would never walk normally again, but he could eventually cover small distances with assistance. Clara, now 7, followed every small achievement with infectious enthusiasm. When Bernard showed her that he could stand and take a few steps, the girl almost burst with joy. "I knew it," she shouted, jumping around the room. "I knew you could do it." "How could you know?" Bernard asked, amused by her reaction. "Even the doctors weren't sure." "Because you're strong inside," she replied with the profound simplicity that always surprised him. "And whoever is strong inside gets strong outside too, sooner or later." That childish observation remained etched in Bernard's mind. Strong inside. That's not how he saw himself until recently. For years he had felt broken, irreparably damaged, not just in body but primarily in soul. What had changed? What had brought back this inner strength that he himself didn't even know still existed? The answer was everywhere around him. In the garden flowers he had started cultivating again. In the piano chords he had started playing again. In the smiles of the staff who were now almost family, and especially in Clara's eyes, which never saw him as less than he could be. On a Sunday morning, while having coffee on the terrace, Bernard surprised Teresa with an unexpected question. "Have you ever thought about having your own business, Teresa?" She stopped, her cup in the air, surprised by the question. "Well, I've had some dreams, of course. Before Clara was born, I even took a culinary course. I always thought that one day I could have a small coffee shop. But life took another turn." "What kind of coffee shop would it be?" Bernard insisted, seeming genuinely interested. Teresa smiled, letting herself be carried away by the old fantasy. "Something cozy with a few tables. I would serve real coffee, not these mixes they sell around. And I'd have homemade cakes, sourdough bread, simple but well-made things. A place where people could feel at home, you know?" Bernard nodded thoughtfully. The conversation then shifted, but the seed was planted. In the following weeks he made some discreet calls, consulted lawyers, talked to builders. The idea that had emerged as a sudden inspiration slowly took shape, like a carefully planned garden project. Clara, always observant, noticed that something was happening. Bernard spent more time on the phone, received people she had never seen before, and sometimes went out with Claude for mysterious appointments in town. "Are you going on a trip?" she asked directly one afternoon while they were practicing piano. "No, Clara, why?" "Because you're acting like Mommy when she's planning something big. She makes lists, talks on the phone, all mysterious." Bernard laughed. The girl's perceptiveness always surprised him. "I'm preparing a surprise," he admitted, "but I can't tell you yet." "Is it for me?" she asked hopefully. "It's for all of us," he replied enigmatically. "Be patient. You'll know soon." 3 months later, in the first week of summer, Bernard finally revealed his project. He invited Teresa and Clara for a car ride through the town centre. Claude drove to a quiet street near the main square, where small businesses lined up in well-preserved historic buildings. He stopped in front of a newly renovated building, with a sea-green facade and large windows. "What do you think?" Bernard asked, carefully observing Teresa's reaction. She looked at the building, then at Bernard, confused. "It's beautiful. What is it?" "For now, just an empty building," he replied. "But it could be a coffee shop, if someone was interested in running one." Teresa's eyes widened as she understood what he was implying. "Mr. Alistair, you're not—" "I bought the property 2 months ago," he explained. "I had it renovated specifically for an accessible coffee shop, with tables on the sidewalk, ample interior space. It has a full kitchen in the back, equipped with everything necessary." He paused, observing Teresa's incredulous expression. "I'd like to offer it to you." "Offer?" she repeated, unable to fully process what she was hearing. "As your property," Bernard clarified. "It's already registered in your name and Clara's. The documents are with my lawyer." Teresa covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes welling up. "But why?" Bernard looked at Clara, who was watching the scene with wide eyes of excitement. "Because you brought me back to life," he replied simply. "And because we all need a project, something that makes us get up in the morning with purpose. This will be yours." They got out of the car and entered the establishment. The interior was even more impressive than the facade, spacious, with light wooden floors, a marble counter, and details that subtly reference the garden of those who don't run, such as wallpaper with foliage patterns and strategically placed potted plants. "The final decoration is still missing." "Of course," Bernard explained, moving with his crutches through the space. "I thought you'd like to choose the details personally." Clara ran from one side to the other, exploring every corner of the place. "We can put my drawings on the walls, Mommy, and make colorful cakes, and have a little corner just for reading books." Teresa still seemed in shock. "Mr. Alistair, I don't even know how to thank you. It's too much. I can't accept something like this." "You can and should," he insisted. "It's not a gift, Teresa. It's an investment. In you, in Clara, and in the future we're building together." He pointed to a small elevated space at the back of the coffee shop. "Besides, I reserved that corner for a piano. I intend to come and play occasionally if you'll allow me." Teresa finally let the tears flow freely. "Of course. Always." The following weeks were filled with intense preparation. Teresa dedicated herself to selecting suppliers, creating the menu and hiring staff, while still fulfilling her duties at the manor. Bernard, in turn, followed everything from a distance, offering advice only when requested, allowing her to take the reins of the business. Clara, excited about the project, decided that her contribution would be to create the visual identity of the place. With the help of her art teacher, she designed a logo, a heart-shaped watering can pouring colorful flowers. When she showed it to Bernard, he couldn't hide his emotion. "It's perfect, Clara," he said, his voice choked. "Absolutely perfect." The small coffee shop, named the Flower Cafe, opened on a sunny February morning. The facade, now decorated with Clara's logo and hanging flower pots, attracted curious glances from passers-by. Inside, each table was named after a flower, and the menus, handwritten on recycled paper, offered drinks and foods with names that evoked the garden: hydrangea cappuccino, magnolia cinnamon cake, jasmine sourdough bread. In a discreet corner, near the entrance, a wooden plaque bore the inscription, "Here, what matters is always watered." Beside it, a small red heart-shaped watering can, identical to the one Clara had given Bernard, served as a decorative object and a symbol of the place's philosophy. To the surprise of many, Bernard did not attend the official inauguration. He sent flowers and a letter of congratulations, but preferred to let that moment belong entirely to Teresa and Clara. It was their beginning, and he understood the importance of giving them space to flourish on their own. A week later, when the initial hustle had subsided, Bernard finally visited the cafe. It was late afternoon, a quiet time. Using his crutches, he managed to enter without help, drawing surprised and respectful glances from the few customers present. Teresa greeted him with an affectionate hug. "I was expecting your visit," she said, leading him to a reserved table near the window. "How do you feel seeing your investment working?" "It's not my investment, Teresa. It's your cafe. I just had the privilege of helping to make it a reality." Clara, who was helping her mother after school, ran to hug him as soon as she saw him. "Mr. Alistair, Finally, come see everything. All my drawings are on the back wall and the piano arrived yesterday. And we have a little book corner, and we make the best hot chocolate in Aspenwood. The girl's enthusiasm was contagious. Bernard allowed himself to be guided by her through the establishment, admiring every detail, every careful choice that reflected Teresa's personality and Clara's artistic touch. The place had a soul, the same soul they had helped awaken in him. When they reached the small stage where the upright piano had been installed, Bernard felt a lump in his throat. The instrument was nothing compared to the Steinway in the manor, but it had its own charm. On the wall behind it, in a simple frame, was the first drawing Clara had made for him, the one with the conductor playing in a flowery garden. "Mommy said you can play whenever you want," Clara explained. "She thinks the customers will love it." Bernard smiled, touched by the gesture. "Perhaps one day," he replied, knowing the promise was sincere. "Today I came only to appreciate what you two have created." They sat together to have coffee and taste the homemade cakes that were already becoming a success in town. Clara talked non-stop about plans for the cafe's future, poetry nights, local art exhibitions, storytelling gatherings for children. Teresa, more reserved but visibly happy, added practical details and shared customers' first impressions. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light through the large windows, Bernard realized it was time to leave. He had accomplished what he came to do, witness the happiness he had helped build. "I need to go," he announced, preparing to stand. "Claude must be waiting outside." "But you'll come back, won't you?" Clara asked, holding his hand. "To play the piano?" "I'll be back," he promised. "Many times." As they said goodbye at the door, Teresa held his hands firmly, her eyes bright with contained emotion. "I can never thank you enough, Mr. Alistair." "You don't need to," he replied, smiling. "Just keep watering what matters." When Claude helped him into the car, Bernard looked one last time at the welcoming facade of the Flower Café. He felt a peace he hadn't known in many years, the feeling of having contributed to something greater than himself, of having been an instrument for others to realize their dreams. The next morning, Clara appeared at the manor earlier than usual. She carried her blue notebook, now almost completely filled with stories, drawings, and emotional recipes. "Good morning, Mr. Alistair," she greeted cheerfully, entering the library where he was reading the newspaper. "I brought something for you." She handed him a sheet torn from her notebook, where she had written in her irregular handwriting, "Recipe for special days, can't wake up thinking of good things, drink coffee. Remembering those we love, eyes do something. Difficult even when afraid, cuts and help someone be happy. 5. Go to sleep knowing tomorrow will be even better. It's for you to keep," she explained. "For when I'm not here." Bernard frowned, confused. "And why wouldn't you be here?" "Because now I have to help Mommy at the cafe after school. I won't be able to come every day." There was a hint of sadness in her voice, mixed with the pride of her new responsibility. Bernard felt the same, a bittersweet mixture of loss and fulfillment. "I understand," he said, carefully folding the paper. "But you will always be welcome here, Clara. The garden of those who don't run is as much yours as it is mine." She smiled, relieved. "Can I come on weekends? And during holidays?" "Whenever you want," he assured her. "Besides, now that I'm walking with crutches, I can visit you at the cafe more often." Clara's eyes sparkled with a sudden idea. "You can give piano lessons there, and tell stories to the children, and teach about flowers." Bernard laughed, infected by her enthusiasm. "That's an excellent idea," persistent Clara. "I'll seriously consider it." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Clara, in her typical excitement, ran to hug him. Instinctively, Bernard rose from his chair, supported by his crutches, to embrace her. For a few seconds they stayed like that, he standing with effort but firmly, hugging the little girl who had transformed his life. "You're standing," she exclaimed, amazed. "Alone?" "Not exactly alone," he corrected, looking significantly at her. "I'll never truly be alone again, Clara." Through the library window, the morning light illuminated the garden of those who don't run. The flowers swayed gently with the breeze, as if waving, as if understanding the silent miracle happening within those walls. A man who believed he was condemned to immobility was rediscovering step by step not only physical movement, but the movement of life itself, that constant dance between giving and receiving, between teaching and learning, between watering and flourishing. On the shelf behind them, where trophies and professional recognition diplomas once stood, there was now just a simple frame with a child's drawing, a bright sun, a wheelchair, and the phrase written in colorful, irregular letters, "You can walk with your heart first." And that was exactly what Bernard Alistair had learned to do. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Bernard and Clara's journey has touched your hearts and watered your own hopes. To discover more inspiring stories like this, be sure to check out our special Rebirths playlist available on the channel. If this narrative brought light to your day, leave your like and subscribe to continue receiving stories that, like the garden of those who don't run, bloom even in the most unexpected places. Share in the comments what moment touched your soul the most. Was it when Clara gave the heart-shaped watering can, or when Bernard finally stood up? We look forward to reading your impressions. Until the next story,